I'm Mangino. Welcome to the Mangino Talks Pittsburgh podcast. We talk about everything that matters to us all, from current events to Pittsburgh history, social issues to sports, politics, to practical day-to-day life. And today, I want to talk about the ongoing story regarding the Tree of Life shooting and the trial that's taking place. And one of the interesting stories that has come out as a result of this trial is one that's in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And it's titled, That Perpetrator Hasn't Sought Forgiveness in Any Way. Jewish Faith Says Pittsburgh Synagogue Shooter Cannot Be Forgiven Until He Seeks It, which is, in my mind, really fascinating. I mean, it opens up a whole host of different questions. Like, what is forgiveness in the first place? I mean, obviously, the government isn't forgiving Robert Bowers. They just tried him. They convicted him on, over 60 different counts, many of them capital offenses. And now the issue is, does he get punished for his offenses for the rest of his natural-born life, or does he have his life taken away from him? So in that respect, forgiveness is not being offered to him, and he's not seeking it. His own attorneys admit to his guilt and are ready for a punishment. They're just asking for one as compared to the other. So when it comes to forgiveness, is this more about what it does for us than what it would do for him? Let's talk about that. Dr. Paul Friday is my special guest today. He is the chief of clinical psychology at UPMC Shadyside. And Doctor, welcome to Mangino Talks. Always great to talk to you, sir.
Robert, thanks for having me on board. It's always a pleasure.
Your thoughts regarding the issue of forgiveness, and would you agree with me that at this stage, the forgiveness issue is really a whole lot more about what it does for one's own self that has been offended, a whole lot more than it would do for the person who's been doing the offending?
I agree with you 100%. Forgiveness has to do with what's going on in the war in your brain and what you can do to get an honorable peace. It has little or nothing to do with what's going on in your world outside of you.
There's an interesting comment that was made that's in the paper from Maggie Feinstein. She's a therapist and director of the 1027 Healing Partnership. And she says that by no means is forgiveness the only way to move forward, and that anger, you can actually hold it in your life in a way that's healthy without feeling like you are carrying it as a weight. Do you see, is there any aspect to where holding, if you would, let me use the term, a grudge, resentment, anger towards somebody is beneficial to oneself?
Well, let's just talk about emotions.
Okay.
I don't believe, as a clinical psychologist with having listened to people for 90,000 hours, I don't believe there's such a thing as a bad emotion. I think anything in excess, too much oxygen will kill you. Too much money is not a good thing. Too much of anything is not good. And I don't care if it's anger or joy or anything. For we go back to the Aristotelian concept of Nicomachean ethics, and that's all things in moderation. Forgiveness is an aspect, I would say, of multiple religions, Judaism, Christianity, where it's considered a good thing. I would offer as a clinical psychologist that forgiveness, it's a good thing, but all things in moderation. And just because you forgive doesn't mean you're going to forget.
Help us understand more about what you mean by that, this idea of I forgive you, but I'm not forgetting. How do you mean that?
Well, I would offer what people are trying to do by saying, I forgive you, is to try and rid themselves of an emotion that is disquieting, that they don't like. It's pervasive. It's intrusive. It won't go away. It won't give any kind of room for lots of other normal everyday emotions. And because of this intrusiveness, we want it to stop. And so we can say, I forgive you, in hopes that I can get on with my life and live in a more balanced way. it doesn't have that much to do with you. It has to do with some feelings that I have that I don't like. It would be like we're trying to pass it on to somebody else. Just an aside, can we forgive a debt? Can a president forgive a loan? Let's say the educational loan.
Hmm.
No, he can pass it on to somebody else, but it cannot be forgiven in the sense of made to go away. It's there. I can try and have somebody else take care of it. I can take forgiveness for Bauer. I can say, I don't like the intrusiveness of what Bauer did to me. I had a very, very good friend, Jerry Rabinowitz, who was murdered by this man on that day. Jerry and I would have lunch several times a week for years. He was president of the medical staff at Shadyside. We exchanged patients. We were very good friends. Bauer killed him. I don't forgive Bauer. I have no need. I don't have it as an intrusive thought. I can still sleep. I can still work. I love my family. I
Hmm.
get on with my life. But when I think of Bauer, I think of Jerry and how he removed from the world a very, very good person for no reason for which he is not asking forgiveness. So does somebody have to ask for forgiveness to give it?
Hmm.
Well, again, it doesn't have to do with the person who did a particular behavior. It has to do with me and everybody who's listening to your podcast. It has to do with you. How do you feel and what do you want to do with that feeling? Well, if it's too invasive and too pervasive, then I would suggest you do something to alter that, and maybe a modicum of forgiveness might help you.
Hmm.
It has nothing to do with Bauer.
When it comes to helping people process and move on, one of the ladies that was quoted in this story is a woman from the Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina. At her church back in 15, a white supremacist gunman killed 9 black members at a Bible study. And she says that she forgave. And my question for you is, for those who are really experiencing a very close, intimate, raw emotion as a result of this, if it's not about forgiving, what other ways can individuals process their thoughts and feelings in order to be able to move on to where, if nothing else, it's not detrimental to their own life?
Well, Robert, I'm a cognitive therapist, and it's been true. It's been proven in meta studies that cognitive therapy works. Now, I maintain in the epilogue of my book that the way therapy is effective, it's a process. It is something that goes on between human beings when they're alone in what I call the adult vault. And I would offer somebody who has a overpowering emotion, I don't care what it is, if it's controlling your life, if it's disturbing your life, my suggestion is you get involved in what we call cognitive therapy. You
Okay.
talk with somebody who's trained, who knows what they're doing. This is not a charlatan, who can help you sort through those thoughts so that you can think more effectively. If it's interfering with your life so much that you lose effective thinking, then it's time to seek some help. And it's available.
Hmm.
It's not a psychoanalytic process where you have 3-hour sessions 5 days a week for 7 years to maybe get a squeaky clean psyche. No, no, no. Cognitive therapy tends to be very quick and very effective. And the issue is the relationship between an individual and a therapist, and to use that cauldron of trust, which is what all relationships are, in my view, it's trust. And as long as you trust somebody, you are then opening yourself up to change, which my third law says is the toughest thing a human being can do. It's not that people can't change; it's
Hmm.
just it's very difficult.
Is there a legitimacy in a concern that if anger is allowed to fester, that it can then be not only damaging to one's own psyche, the relationships with others that they surround themselves with, and they too could then act out in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have if they got that cognitive therapy you were talking about.
Robert, that's correct. That's true of anger. It's also true of joy. It's also true of sexual functioning. It's also true of spending or saving money. It's true of every single human emotion and behavior. Too much is bad, and too much can kill you, and it can harm lots of stuff. So it's not the neutrality of boredom. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about a reasonable approach to something that is becoming dysfunctional, is making your life dysfunctional. And the way to do that is simply monitor. And sometimes you have to ask others, do you think we're going too far on this? And good, loving relationships will give honest responses. It's just when anything gets to be too much, anger is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be good for life. Um, it's like war is not healthy for children and other living things. Too much anger is not good
Yes.
for reasonable living.
You were mentioned earlier this idea of forgiving, but not necessarily forgetting. There's an aspect
Hmm.
of a defense mechanism. I mean, going beyond the issue of a mass murder here, just talking about interpersonal relationships that people have where there's an aspect of forgiveness. That idea of not forgetting, to what extent is it beneficial and important, and then to what extent can that idea of not forgetting and then letting go of what someone previously asked for forgiveness for and genuinely sought it, and then this idea of bringing it up, help us with that aspect of it.
Okay, forgiving and forgetting. Uh, the human brain does not work on negation. Let's start there.
Okay.
It is impossible for the human brain to function in a negation mode. In other words, Mangino, I want you not to think of a polar bear. Well, I'm sorry, the human brain can't. It's incapable of doing that. So if I say I want you to not think about the massacre at the Tree of Life, well, guess what we're already thinking about?
Mm-hmm.
The issue is whether it is so invasive and pervasive that I can't get on with my life in the thousands, tens of thousands of other arenas that everybody who's listening to your podcast is involved in. If you get a domination of one or two things that you just can't forget, it could be the death of your parent. Here's the worst thing: have a child die, and try not to think of that.
Right.
Well, I'm sorry, that is the worst thing that can happen to a human being, in my view, is the death of a child.
Mm.
And you just don't, quote, get over it.
Right.
That doesn't mean you don't think of your child. It means that you, as best you can, you perspectivize that lifelong pain that you will carry with you, that few people can understand unless they've walked in those shoes. So the goal is not to forget your child. My goal is not to forget Jerry Rabinowitz. And my goal is not to forget Bauer. Bauer has not asked my forgiveness. Well, I basically don't want to forgive him. I don't care. Now, is it pervasive? No, no. But he did a very evil behavior. And I'm not going to pretend like he didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
He did. We live in a fabulous culture and country where there is justice. Don't look at the three standard deviations from the mean to the right and the left. Forget them. I'd like to put them all on an island and sink it because they're not helping. I'm just talking about normal, average American people. We are so fortunate, and we have a system of justice. That justice is being sorted out right now. And just like a nose, everybody listening to you, Robert, has an opinion. And that opinion for them, it works for them. That doesn't mean it can't, the opposite or something else can't work for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a good, reasonable American can understand that we can have different views of the world and that's okay. That doesn't make the other side an enemy. Some people say, no, he should stay alive. And then other people say, well, how many millions are we going to spend to keep him alive? And an eye for an eye and well, that's the Old Testament. Well, yeah, but what with Christ, you can go on and on and on. What you'll end up with is a rationalization of your emotional position. You will end up with a position, most likely, that you started with. Third law, change is the toughest thing a human being can do.
Mm-hmm.
When you give an article to somebody to read, what you're trying to do is change them. Now, I'll bet my dollars to your donuts, Robert, that article speaks to what you believe. And you think this objective piece is going to somehow change somebody else's opinion or view of the world. It doesn't, because you can't change other people. That's the fourth law.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. The human brain has resilience, and it takes a huge amount of stuff to let human beings change. My life changed the day Jerry Rabinowitz was murdered. Now, I'll say to you, since 9/11, I have done something every single day of my life because I was so distraught with a complete hatred and understanding of how people could try and kill our country when my view, and I just saw Oppenheimer, my view is we have always tried to do the right and the good thing. And here you are slaughtering 5,000 Americans who did nothing to you.
Right.
Well, how do I overcome that? Every day of my life, when I'm at work, I buy the lunch of the person behind me as an act of love to counteract the hatred that I have of the people who tried to destroy my country.
Very nice.
Now, I can walk around not liking Hindus or Muslims or Orthodox Jews or fervent Catholics. I can go around till the cows come home telling you, oh, you don't like that. Or you can do a behavior. Notice this is not just a thought, Robert. This is a behavior. I turn and I leave before the counter people tell the person behind me that they have a free lunch, and they don't. There's no jumping up. Oh, Dr. Friday did it. No, I just do it because the only way to overcome that disdain of 9/11 is to daily do an act of love.
Nice.
And that's what buying somebody's lunch is.
That's beautiful.
It's an act of love.
Let me ask you one more thing, and we'll wrap this up.
Okay.
There are those that say that I just can't forgive. It's not an option. In fact, that's a quote, in fact, by Rabbi Schiff.
Yeah.
As far as I know, the perpetrator hasn't sought forgiveness in any way. He has not sought forgiveness. There is really no process that would be possible. And then there are others who say, well, my goodness, you need to be forgiving. And then the other person says, well, I just can't bring myself at this point. So help us with the opposite sides. The one that would say, I want to forgive, but somehow my core belief system says I've got to go through this series of events first before I can. And then another individual who says, my religion teaches me I must forgive, and I just can't bring myself to that point. Help us process this so we are not overburdening ourselves with guilt.
The verb you used is the critical one, and that's process. It needs to be processed. My opinion is that cannot be processed in the marketplace. It has to be processed in a very private relationship with another human being who knows what they're doing. And that process I call good therapy. And the therapy is not there to change you. The therapy is to help you get perspective on yourself, not Bauer, on yourself. Is this emotion hurting you and the people you love? And if it is, my suggestion is do something about it. If it's not hurting you and it's not hurting the people about you, well, get on with life, as long as you're balanced, go ahead.
There you go. Dr. Paul Friday, once again, Chief of Clinical Psychology, joining us on Mangino Talks. Doctor, thank you very much for your time. Do appreciate it as always.
Thanks for having me on board, Robert.
Thank you, Dr. Paul Friday, once again, on Mangino Talks. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Please be sure to click the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. By the way, new episodes drop Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Pittsburgh time. For more on me and the show, be sure to visit ManginoTalks.com. If there's a topic that you would like me to talk about or a guest that you would like me to have on, send me an email, Mangino@ManginoTalks.com. Follow me on your favorite social media platform by just searching Mangino Talks. And thanks again for listening to the Mangino Talks podcast.
The future